Hi, this is Shane Starr on a beautiful evening in Los Angeles on my day off. And today we're doing the fourth video in a series of 9 Enneagram videos, today being Enneagram 4. Now, Enneagram 4 has wings, obviously 3 and 5, and it has an integration arrow coming from 2. So if you are a 2 looking to maximize your personality, gifts, and traits, look for that arrow to 4. If you are an Enneagram 3 with a 4 wing, this video might help. If you're an Enneagram 5 with a 4 wing, this Enneagram video might help. And help what? We're looking at being the best version of ourselves we can possibly be. And in this series, we're focusing on Enneagram and how to make that happen. So the idea behind it, the arrow of integration is pretty straightforward. Wings, again, I say this every video, it's like an airplane, and if you're too heavy in one wing or the other, you're going to be out of balance. So we are at our best when we're in balance, which means that if 4 is your weaker wing, then that's something that you'll benefit from working on. So what are we talking about when we talk about a healthy Enneagram 4? As always, this is the book I like to use. There's a blue one by the same author, Richard Riso, Don Richard Riso and Ross Hudson. And a lot of their work, it's not known that much, but Ichazo and Naranjo were like the grounding influences of Riso and Hudson's work. I always thought of them as being like separate, and they do have different emphases, but they come from the same line of thought. So back to Enneagram 4. The Enneagram 4 in a healthy state is self-aware, introspective, engaged in a search for self, aware of feelings and inner impulses, sensitive and intuitive, both to self and others, gentle, tactful, compassionate, highly personable, individualistic, true to their feelings, self-revealing, emotionally honest, humane, ironic view of self and life, can be serious and funny, vulnerable and emotionally strong. At their best, they are profoundly creative, expressing the personal and universal, possibly in a work of art. That could be painting, film, music. There's different types of art, but inspired, self-renewing, and regenerating, able to transform all their experiences into something valuable, redemptive, and self-creative. So that's what a healthy Enneagram 4 looks like, and that's the type of characteristics you're going to be moving towards if you have a 3 or a 5 as your core type, or you're a core 2 trying to move forward with your arrow of integration to 4. Okay, so who did I pick for today's video? A famous existential author by the name of Albert Camus. Most famous, he's French, but he was actually born in Algerian, French Algeria, and he is, he suffered a little bit of prejudice against him being a little bit different from the other people where he lived. And during his childhood, he was very into sports, particularly soccer, a little bit of swimming too. Now, one of the things I find interesting, I don't like to cancel people out from being a certain type, but everyone seems to tag Camus as an INFP. And when you look at the biography of his life, it does not fit at all. I think what happens in most cases with philosophers or literary authors is someone looks at a work they wrote and associates the person with the work to such an extent that they become blind to other things. Before I forget, his dates are 1913 to 1960, and I'll have more of that to say at the end of this section. But Camus loved sports as a kid. He was actually a goalie at a very high, like pre-pro level, and he made many analogies about football, meaning soccer if you're in America, and life. And he really, it's said about him that he played with passion and courage, and by all accounts, he was a great goalkeeper. So again, not that INFPs can't be good at sports or be a good goalie, but something just doesn't ring right to me with INFP. After he was done with sports, he became part of the resistance in World War II, operated in France against the Germans, and he became well known in resistance circles. And post-war, he was influential with a lot of academic work and politics. He became basically he was a communist for a while, and he was friends with Jean-Paul Sartre, and they were both atheists. They both were existentialists. They both believed in a universe without meaning, which I'm not saying you have to be that to be an Enneagram 4, but that's going to come into play in a minute. Apparently, Camus started going against communism when he saw some of the worst points about the philosophy, especially as it became apparent all the atrocities that the Russians committed in World War II and post-World War II. And his friendship with Sartre ended over this because Camus became more of a socialist instead of a straight communist, and Sartre stayed a straight communist. So we see that as being like really close. To them, that was like a incomprehensible split to their friendship. Camus was married, but apparently he had several affairs. He wasn't very faithful to his wife, which again, I'm going to bring up INFP as his most popular typing. I don't see that as being a characteristic of any, let alone most INFPs. So again, I would challenge, a guy into sports who cheats, who was in active resistance, putting himself in physical danger during the war and stuff, which he didn't have to do. Being from Algeria, he could have retreated to there. I don't see that as being an INFP thing, but this video isn't about whether or not he's an INFP. It's just a point. So Camus died at the age of 46 in a car accident. He had his wife and kids, and he sent them off and was in a sports car with another friend, and they crashed. And they were with, it looks like, two young ladies, and the ladies were okay. The driver died about 5 days after the crash, and Camus died instantly. And it's kind of ironic because he always talked about a universe with no purpose, a universe with no meaning, and he called it the absurd, and that's the way he died, in an absurd way. So let's move on. He did win the Nobel Peace Prize for literature, and that's something really cool. But overall, I would say, anytime someone's life gets cut short from an accident, to me, that's kind of tragic. And again, ironically, it goes with his philosophy. It's like a premonition of sorts. He believed that the universe was absurd, and that's the way he went out. Okay, So enough of that. The work we're going to use, he had several that are good. I've read a lot of his work, and I'm going to use a novel he wrote that's the most popular work of his, called The Stranger. So to summarize, I mean, I could summarize it myself. I don't need my notes to do that, but I don't want to miss anything. In The Stranger, it's a story of someone named Mersal, and he's an detached rather, indifferent man living in French Algeria. He attends his mother's funeral, and he's kind of lackadaisical about it. It's like, oh yeah, she died yesterday or last week. I'm not sure, whatever. I'm here. And he becomes friends. He meets someone at the funeral, and they're walking on the beach, and they have a conflict with this guy who's also walking on the beach. It turns out that they start to fight. Long story short, the other guy gets shot and killed, and the authorities get Mersal, put him in jail, and sentence him to death. That's the outer realm of the story. But what really happens underneath that is that this book explores, through the character and his interactions, just this theme of meaninglessness and absurdness of the universe. Like Mersal didn't even want to be at his mom's funeral, really. He didn't really care about walking on the beach. He didn't have a particular conflict with the guy who they shot. And he just finds himself like a victim of circumstance in many ways. Yet he has these very strong principles that he won't compromise on, because to do so would be to live inauthentically. And that principle is more important to him than even living. And so, I mean, perhaps this being Camus' most famous work, and this character seemingly being kind of like INFP-ish, maybe that's why that type gets attributed to Camus a lot, because this lead character, he has such strong introverted feeling principles that people then make that correlation to the author of this character. So the Mersal ends up getting sentenced to death. There's a little part in there where they kind of make a straw man argument of the Catholic priest being not a very good character in the book, and Mersal seems to have more dignity and honor than the priest. And there's a little dig at religion from Camus there. But overall, the novel's tragic in that a seemingly innocent man loses his life over something that really wasn't his fault. And instead of fighting it, he, in a almost pseudo Christ-like way, he lets his executors have their way with them. And that's again, that's tragic. So how does this story relate to Enneagram 4? I think the absurdism of the story, the absurd, the meaninglessness of the universe, it's not a strict logical correlation here, but a lot of Enneagram 4s seem to have that issue. They are looking for meaning. They're kind of melancholic. They're emotionally up and down. They have their moments of happiness like we all do, but oftentimes they're depressed and not very happy. And a lot of them see themselves as victims, and I think this character does as well. Also, the alienation from other people. Mersal feels alienated from the community, from even his own family and friends, but more so the authorities who are sentencing him to death. He's different. He has principles, they don't. He knows who he is and what he believes in. They seemingly just go through the motions. And also, even the character's indifference in and of itself is a strong principle, because it's easy to just let oneself be attached to things he or she is supposed to, given the community structure and things perpetrated upon us by our community. But Mersal, if he doesn't care and he just says so, like, no, I don't care. And you're not going to make me care. You're not going to guilt trip me into caring about something I don't. Even when it comes to saving his own life, he won't compromise. The book also relates to Enneagram 4 in this search for meaning, which unfortunately in the book leads nowhere, and unfortunately in life it seems to go along with that same path. And a lot of us never find the answers we're looking for. And last but not least, and I've already touched on this, the authenticity of the character, being firm to his principles, that brings out the best in Enneagram 4s as well. Okay, so that's how this novel, if you're a 4 or relate to 4 at all, you ought to read the novel. You'll find a lot to like in there. And it'll make you upset, but upset in a good way. It'll motivate you to really embrace that side of yourself. So what are some ways that you can actually activate that inner Enneagram 4? I would say the first and foremost thing is to be just to practice self-awareness and authenticity. Accept yourself, love yourself, be honest. Again, to use this Shakespeare, be true to thyself. That doesn't mean, do whatever you want. It means be honest with who you are. Know what you want, know what you don't want, and then live accordingly. And that leads us to authentic expression. Don't change who you are for the world or any particular person. And I would say, again, to kind of make a connection with the book, this character, Mersal, he does seem to have an affinity and a connection to nature. And that connection is almost like his religion that he uses to inspire him to practice, to just practice his principles and be true to what he really believes. And I think that's something we can mimic in ourselves, is have that meaningful connection with whatever it is, whether it's God, nature, other people, whatever gives you grounding and makes you stronger. Look to that. And I would say that in and of itself will lead you to have more productivity and purpose in your life. And I think the way this looks is find a creative outlet if you don't have one already, whether it's, art, music, reading, YouTube videos. Find something where you can be you and do things you love and want to do. And in doing so, that'll also help you develop discipline and focus, and ultimately a sense of purpose. And I think those are the ways we can really activate that inner Enneagram 4 within ourselves. That's all I have for tonight. Tomorrow we'll look into Enneagram 5, and see you then. Peace out.